In 2010, Eleanor's daughter Sarah contacted a paranormal researcher. She was worried about her mother, she said. Eleanor had been having episodes where she would speak in that same strange voice from 1968. During these episodes, she would say things like, "The door is opening wider," and "They're coming through in other places now." Sarah had recorded one of these episodes. In the recording, multiple voices can be heard, speaking through Eleanor simultaneously. One voice, clearly Eleanor's own, seems to be crying and saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was just a child." The other voices, layered and distorted, speak in that same unknown language from decades ago. Sarah also revealed that her mother had been keeping journals for years, hundreds of notebooks filled with drawings and symbols that made no sense, the same patterns that had appeared on the walls of the Enfield house. But more disturbing were the maps Eleanor had drawn, maps of Enfield with marks at specific locations. When Sarah checked these locations against public records, she found that unexplained incidents had occurred at every single one. Houses abandoned suddenly, families disappearing, children reporting invisible friends who knew impossible things. In 2015, a group of urban explorers decided to camp on the empty lot where the Hayes house had stood. They lasted 2 hours. Their footage, posted online before they removed it under pressure from local authorities, showed something extraordinary. Using thermal cameras, they captured heat signatures moving through the empty space where the house would have been. The signatures showed people walking up stairs that didn't exist, opening doors that weren't there, moving through rooms that had burned down 40 years earlier. The house was gone, but something remained, still following the floor plan of a structure that no longer stood. One of the explorers, Marcus Brown, reported something that wasn't captured on camera. He said he had felt compelled to stand in a specific spot, roughly where Eleanor's bedroom would have been. The moment he stood there, he could see the house around him, not as a ghost or transparent image, but solid and real. He could see the furniture, the wallpaper, even feel the carpet under his feet. He saw a young girl standing in the corner, watching him. She looked like Eleanor from the old photographs, but her eyes were different, ancient. When she spoke, she said, "You're standing in all the times at once. This place doesn't follow your rules. It never has." The local library in Enfield has restricted access to their archives about the Hayes case. The librarian, Dorothy Vance, will only say that researchers who spend too much time with the materials report disturbing effects, nightmares about houses with too many rooms, losing time while reading the documents, finding notes in their own handwriting that they don't remember making. One researcher, Dr. James Whitmore from Northwestern University, spent 3 days studying the materials in 2018. He was found on the 3rd day standing in the archive room, pressing his hands against the eastern wall, muttering numbers that made no sense. He had no memory of the previous 2 days and never returned to complete his research. The numbers Whitmore had been muttering were recorded by Vance. When analyzed, they appeared to be coordinates, but not to any location on Earth. One physicist who examined them suggested they might be temporal coordinates, marking a specific point in time rather than space. That point, when calculated, was the 31st of October, 1968, the night the Hayes family fled their home. In 2019, satellite imagery of the empty lot revealed something unusual. While the surface appeared normal, ground-penetrating radar showed structures beneath the earth. Not foundations or basements, but what appeared to be rooms. Complete rooms with walls and doorways buried at various depths. Some were positioned in ways that defied physics, overlapping or existing in the same space. When the county tried to investigate, their excavation equipment failed repeatedly. Drill bits shattered. Excavators broke down. One operator claimed his machine had suddenly reversed its controls, digging up instead of down, though video footage showed it operating normally. Jeffrey Hayes, Eleanor's brother, broke his decades-long silence in 2020. Now in his 60s, he revealed something the family had never shared. On their last night in the house, they had all seen something that made them agree never to speak of it. In the basement, the eastern wall had become transparent. Beyond it, they could see another basement, identical but wrong. In that other basement stood their family, but different. Older versions, younger versions, versions that had never existed. All of them were screaming silently, pressing against the wall from the other side, trying to break through. Jeffrey also admitted that he still dreams about the house every night. In his dreams, he never left. In his dreams, he's still 12 years old, still living in that house, still counting down to something he can't understand. He wakes each morning surprised to find himself old, surprised to find himself somewhere else. Sometimes, he said, he's not sure which is the dream and which is real. Thomas Hayes died in 2005, but Patricia lived until 2017. In her final years, suffering from dementia, she would have moments of clarity where she would grab nurses and whisper urgently about the house. She would say the same thing over and over. We weren't the first family to live there, and we weren't the last. We're all still there, all of us, living in the same house at different times. The house doesn't let you leave. You think you've escaped, but you're still there. We're all still there. The nursing home staff reported that Patricia's room would experience unusual events, furniture moving, lights flickering in patterns. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, they would find her standing at the eastern wall of her room, pressing her hands against it, speaking to someone who wasn't there. When they moved her to a different room without an eastern wall, she would stand in the corner, facing east, having the same conversations with empty air. Diane Hayes, now Diane Brennan, lives in California. She became a therapist specializing in trauma related to unexplained experiences. She never speaks publicly about her own experiences, but her colleagues say she has an uncanny ability to believe her patients' most impossible stories. In her office, she keeps one item from the Enfield house, a small piece of wood from the basement wall. She says it helps her remember that some things can't be explained, only survived. In her private notes, leaked by a former colleague, Diane wrote about her theory of what happened in Enfield. She believed the house existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every family who had ever lived there was still there, occupying the same space but separated by barriers that had begun to break down. The poltergeist activity wasn't haunting, it was collision. Different times and realities bumping into each other, trying to occupy the same space. She also wrote about Eleanor's role. She believed Eleanor wasn't sensitive to the phenomena, but was somehow the catalyst. Her presence had weakened the barriers between realities. That's why the activity followed patterns related to her movements and emotions. Eleanor wasn't being haunted. She was the key that had unlocked something that should have stayed closed. The current owner of the empty lot, who wishes to remain anonymous, has reported receiving offers to buy the land every year. The offers come from different people, but always for the exact same amount, $31,968. When reversed, those numbers read $86,913, which corresponds to no significant date or event anyone can identify. The owner has refused all offers, saying he feels responsible for keeping the land empty. He admits he's never actually visited the property in person. He's too afraid of what he might see, or, worse, what might see him. In 2021, a team of quantum physicists from the University of Chicago proposed studying the lot as a potential example of what they called temporal thin points. They theorized that certain locations might experience a breakdown in the normal flow of time, allowing past, present, and future to exist simultaneously. Their request to conduct experiments was denied by local authorities, who cited public safety concerns. Privately, city officials admitted they were afraid of what might be discovered or, more concerning, what might be released. The last reported incident occurred in 2022. A delivery driver making a wrong turn ended up on Broughton Road at dusk. He reported seeing a house where the empty lot should be, not abandoned or old, but well maintained with lights in the windows and a family visible inside having dinner. He could see them clearly, a man, a woman, and 3 children. As he watched, the youngest child, a girl with dark hair, turned and looked directly at him through the window. She smiled and waved. Then the house flickered like a bad television signal and disappeared, leaving only the empty lot. The driver, Antonio Vega, took a photograph just before the house vanished. The image shows the empty lot, but there are shadows that don't match anything in the frame. Shadows of a house, of trees that don't exist, of people standing where no one stood. When enhanced, one shadow appears to show a young girl pressing her hands against something, perhaps a window, perhaps a wall, perhaps the barrier between her world and ours. The Poltergeist of Enfield, Illinois. Some houses keep secrets in their walls, others harbor memories in their foundations. But in southern Illinois, there once stood a modest white farmhouse that did something far more unsettling. It fought back. The events that unfolded there would draw investigators from across the country, leave physical evidence that defied explanation, and ultimately force an entire family to abandon their home. What happened in that house remains one of the most documented cases of poltergeist activity in American history. Yet, even with all the witnesses, all the recordings, and all the physical proof, we still cannot say with certainty what tormented the Hayes family for those 5 terrible months in 1968. Enfield, Illinois sits in the southeastern corner of the state, about 40 miles from the Indiana border. In the late 1960s, it was a farming community of barely 1,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where doors stayed unlocked, and where the biggest news usually involved crop yields or high school football scores. The town had one main street, a handful of churches, and endless fields of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon. The Hayes family had lived in White County for generations. Thomas Hayes worked at the local grain elevator. His wife, Patricia, taught Sunday school at the Methodist church. They had 3 children. Diane was 14, a quiet girl who spent most of her time reading. Jeffrey was 12, more interested in baseball than books. And then there was Eleanor, 10 years old, small for her age with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Their house stood on Broughton Road, just outside the town limits. It was nothing special to look at. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch that had seen better days. Thomas had inherited it from his father, who had built it himself back in the 1920s. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a living room and kitchen downstairs, a basement that flooded every spring. The kind of house you could find on any rural road in any farming town across the Midwest. The troubles began on August 3rd, 1968. It was a Saturday evening, still hot despite the sun going down. The family was finishing dinner when they heard it. A single knock on the front door. Thomas got up to answer it, but when he opened the door, no one was there. He stepped out onto the porch, looked around. The nearest neighbor lived a quarter mile away. There was nowhere for someone to hide, no car pulling away down the road. He came back inside, shrugged it off. Kids playing pranks, he figured. But then it happened again. This time 3 knocks, loud and deliberate. Thomas was faster this time, yanking the door open within seconds. Again, nobody there. He walked around the house, checked the backyard, nothing. The knocking continued throughout the evening, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the back, sometimes on the walls themselves. Patricia thought it might be the old pipes, the house settling in the heat. But pipes don't knock in patterns. Houses don't settle with such precise rhythm. That night, as the family tried to sleep, the knocking moved upstairs. It started in the hallway, 3 measured raps that echoed through the house. Then it moved along the walls, circling each bedroom, like something pacing outside. Eleanor began crying. Jeffrey pulled his blanket over his head. Diane lay perfectly still, listening to the sound migrate across her ceiling. Thomas grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate the attic. He found nothing but dust and old furniture covered in sheets. The knocking continued even as he stood there, seeming to come from the very wood around him. He would later tell investigators that it felt like being inside a drum. The next morning, the family attended church as usual. Patricia mentioned the strange noises to her friend Margaret Turner. Margaret's expression changed immediately. She had heard stories about that house, she said. The previous owners, the Richardsons, had moved out suddenly in 1962. They never said why, just packed up and left for California. And before them, the Millers had only lasted 2 years, always leaving quickly, always reluctant to talk about it. Patricia dismissed this as small-town gossip. Old houses make noise. But when they returned home that Sunday afternoon, things escalated. The kitchen cabinets hung open, every single one. Dishes had been pulled from the shelves and stacked on the counter in perfect pyramids. The family stood in the doorway, staring at the scene. They had locked the house when they left. Thomas checked all the windows, all the doors, no sign of forced entry. While Patricia put the dishes away, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, Eleanor mentioned that her dolls had been moved too. The family went upstairs to her room. The dolls, which Eleanor kept on a shelf above her bed, were now arranged on the floor in a perfect circle, facing outward. In the center of the circle sat Eleanor's music box, open and playing its tiny melody. Thomas wanted rational explanations. He called the sheriff's office. Deputy Warren Hutchison arrived within the hour, a young man who had gone to high school with Thomas. He took notes, looked for signs of break-in, found nothing. Probably local teenagers, he suggested, though he couldn't explain how they had gotten inside. He promised to increase patrols in the area. That evening, as the family sat in the living room trying to pretend everything was normal, the television turned on by itself. Not to static, but to a specific channel showing the evening news. Thomas unplugged it. 5 minutes later, it turned on again, still unplugged. The screen showed the same newscast, the anchor's voice filling the room despite the power cord lying loose on the floor. This was witnessed not just by the family, but by their neighbor, Harold Morrison, who had stopped by to return a borrowed tool. Morrison would later sign an affidavit describing what he saw, the television remaining on for nearly 10 minutes without power before finally going dark. Word spread through Enfield quickly. Within days, curious locals were driving past the Hayes house, slowing down to stare. Some offered help, others whispered about curses and devils. The Methodist minister, Reverend William Stanton, came to bless the house. As he spoke his prayers in the living room, every picture on the walls began to swing, not violently, but in perfect unison, like pendulums keeping time. By the second week of August, the phenomena had evolved beyond knocking and moving objects. Voices began echoing through the house. Not words exactly, but sounds that seemed almost like speech, just beyond the edge of understanding. They came from the walls, from the basement, from the attic. Sometimes they sounded like whispers, sometimes like arguments in a distant room. Eleanor seemed particularly sensitive to these voices. She would stop in the middle of playing, cock her head to one side, and listen intently. When asked what she heard, she would say things like, "They're talking about the house," or "They don't like the changes." What changes, her parents would ask. Eleanor could never explain. The physical manifestations grew more aggressive. Furniture began moving on its own, not sliding or tipping, but lifting into the air and floating across rooms. A heavy oak dining table rose 3 feet off the floor while the family ate breakfast, hovering for several seconds before settling back down. The refrigerator pulled away from the wall, moved 6 feet into the center of the kitchen, then returned to its place. These events were witnessed by numerous visitors. Dr. James Morton, the family physician, saw a rocking chair rise to the ceiling and remain there for several minutes. Mary Patterson, Patricia's sister visiting from St. Louis, watched her suitcase unpack itself, clothes folding neatly and arranging themselves in the dresser. The Hayes family started keeping a log, date, time, witnesses, description of events. By the end of August, they had filled 3 notebooks. The entries grew increasingly frantic. Patricia's usually neat handwriting became shaky. Thomas started drawing diagrams, trying to find patterns in the chaos. The 24th of August, 11:30 a.m. Kitchen chairs arranged themselves into a pyramid structure while Diane was doing homework. Margaret Turner present as witness. The 26th of August, 7:15 p.m. Bedroom doors opening and closing in sequence, like dominoes. Sound of footsteps running up and down stairs, though nobody moving. Harold and Beth Morrison present. The 28th of August, 3:00 a.m. Woken by sound of piano playing downstairs. We don't own a piano. Went to investigate, found nothing, but music continued for 20 minutes. Local newspapers picked up the story. The Enfield Eagle ran a front-page article with the headline, "Strange Happenings at Hayes' Home." This brought more attention, more visitors, and surprisingly, more witnesses to increasingly bizarre events. A reporter from the Evansville Courier, Robert Sampson, spent 3 days with the family. His initial skepticism evaporated when he watched his own tape recorder float off the table and hover near the ceiling, still recording. When he played back the tape later, it contained not his interview with the family, but 45 minutes of what sounded like multiple voices speaking backwards. The Illinois State Police sent investigators. They found no evidence of fraud, no hidden wires or devices. One officer, Sergeant Dale Richards, filed a report stating he had observed phenomena inconsistent with known physical laws. He described watching water flow upward from a glass, forming a column that hung in the air for several seconds before splashing to the floor. By September, the house had become unbearable. The family couldn't sleep. Objects flew through the air with increasing violence. A kitchen knife embedded itself in the wall inches from where Jeffrey stood. Dishes exploded without warning. The telephone rang constantly, but when answered, there was only a low, humming sound that seemed to vibrate through whoever held the receiver. Eleanor's behavior began to change. She would stand in corners for hours, staring at nothing. She spoke to invisible companions, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing. When asked who she was talking to, she would say, "The ones who were here before." Patricia found Eleanor one morning standing in the basement, a place the girl had always been afraid to enter. She was drawing symbols on the wall with her finger, leaving no mark but moving with deliberate precision. When Patricia called her name, Eleanor turned around, but her expression was vacant, as if she didn't recognize her own mother. The moment passed quickly, and Eleanor had no memory of going to the basement. The family reached out to anyone who might help. They contacted universities, paranormal investigators, even the Catholic Church, despite being Methodist. Everyone who came to investigate left with more questions than answers. Dr. William Roll from the Psychical Research Foundation spent a week in the house. He documented over 400 separate incidents. His equipment recorded temperature drops of 30 degrees in seconds, electromagnetic spikes that shouldn't exist in a rural farmhouse, and photographs that showed shadows where no shadows should be. One photograph, taken in Eleanor's room, showed what appeared to be a figure standing beside her bed. The figure was translucent, barely visible, but distinctly human-shaped. Eleanor, when shown the photo, simply nodded and said, "That's the sad one. She's always there." September turned to October, and the phenomena reached a crescendo. On October 15th, every piece of furniture in the house rearranged itself while the family was at dinner. They returned to find the living room furniture in the kitchen furniture in the bedroom furniture in the living room, everything placed with impossible precision, as if the rooms had been professionally staged. The next day, words began appearing on the walls, not carved or written, but emerging from within the paint itself. "Leave" appeared above the front door. "Mine" materialized in the kitchen. "Forgotten" spelled itself out, letter by letter, on Eleanor's bedroom wall while she watched. Thomas tried painting over the words. The paint wouldn't stick. It would slide off the walls like water, pooling on the floor while the words remained. He tried wallpaper. It peeled away within hours. The breaking point came on October 21st. The family woke to find every mirror in the house showing not their reflections, but views of the house from impossible angles. The bathroom mirror showed the attic from inside. The hallway mirror displayed the basement, as if the viewer stood in the corner. Patricia's hand mirror revealed the inside of the walls, showing the wooden framework and something else, something dark that seemed to move between the beams. That afternoon, while Eleanor played in her room, Patricia heard her daughter speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. It was deeper, older, speaking words in a language Patricia didn't recognize. When she entered the room, Eleanor was suspended 3 feet above her bed. Her eyes rolled back, still speaking in that strange voice. The moment Patricia screamed, Eleanor fell to the bed, unconscious. She woke up minutes later with no memory of what had happened, but she complained that her room felt different, wrong somehow. She refused to sleep there again. Dr. Morton examined Eleanor and found nothing physically wrong with her, but he recommended the family leave immediately. The stress, he said, was taking a toll on all of them, but especially the children. Patricia had lost 15 pounds. Thomas had developed tremors in his hands. Diane had stopped speaking almost entirely. Jeffrey had begun sleepwalking, often found standing in the basement, staring at the wall where Eleanor had drawn her invisible symbols. The family made the decision to leave on October 28th. As they packed their belongings, the house seemed to resist. Boxes would unpack themselves. Suitcases would disappear and reappear empty. The moving truck they hired broke down 3 times on the way to the house. Finally, on October 31st, Halloween night, the Hayes family left the house on Broughton Road. As they drove away, neighbors reported seeing every light in the house turn on and off in sequence, over and over, like the building was signaling something or someone. The house stood empty for 3 years. The Hayes family never returned, eventually settling in Texas. They rarely spoke about their experiences, and when they did, their stories sometimes conflicted, as if each remembered slightly different versions of the same events. In 1971, the house was purchased by David and Carol Winters, a young couple from Chicago. They lasted 6 months. They reported no paranormal activity, but Carol later told a researcher that the house felt occupied and that she always felt watched, especially in Eleanor's old room. The house burned down in 1974. The fire department found no cause. The fire had started simultaneously in 5 different places, burning so hot that even the foundation cracked. Investigators noted that the burn patterns were unusual, almost deliberate, as if the fire had targeted specific areas of the house. Today, an empty lot sits where the Hayes house once stood. Locals say nothing will grow there. The soil tests normal, but seeds planted in that spot simply don't germinate. The current owner, who bought the land in 1992, tried to build a new house. The foundation cracked 3 times during construction. He eventually gave up, leaving the lot vacant. Eleanor Hayes, now Eleanor Corbin, still lives in Texas. She works as a nurse, has 3 children of her own. She doesn't speak publicly about the events of 1968, but in a single interview given in 2003, she said something that investigators still puzzle over. People ask if I was possessed, if I was the focus of the haunting. I don't think so. I think I was just the only one who could hear them clearly. The house wasn't haunted, it was occupied. We were the intruders. We just didn't know it until they decided to make themselves known. When asked who they were, Eleanor simply shook her head. I promised I wouldn't tell, she said. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Even if the house is gone, some things remain. Researchers have found historical anomalies about the land. Native American tribes avoided that area for centuries before European settlement. The earliest maps mark it with symbols that translators can't quite interpret. One historian found a reference in a settler's journal from 1854 mentioning the hollow ground where the Hayes house would later stand. The Enfield case remains open in the files of several paranormal research organizations. The physical evidence, the multiple witnesses, the documentation, all point to something extraordinary occurring in that house. But what exactly happened there? What force or entity made itself known to the Hayes family? And perhaps most unsettling, where did it go when the house burned down? Some investigators believe the phenomena followed the family, that similar though less intense events occurred at their Texas home. Others think whatever inhabited the house destroyed it, rather than let anyone else occupy that space. The truth, like so much about the Enfield poltergeist, remains elusive. Property records show that in 1968, 3 other families in White County reported unusual events in their homes. All lived within a 5-mile radius of the Hayes house. None of the incidents were as severe, but all involved unexplained sounds, moving objects, and a persistent feeling of being watched. All of these families moved away within 2 years. Dr. Roll, before his death in 2012, said the Enfield case was the most compelling evidence of poltergeist phenomena he had encountered. He believed the events were real, witnessed by too many credible people to dismiss, but he never could explain what caused them. His final notes on the case, found after his death, contained a single question written over and over: what did Eleanor know? The empty lot on Broughton Road still sits vacant. The current owner has stopped paying property taxes, effectively abandoning the land. The county has tried to auction it several times. There have been no bidders. Everyone in Enfield knows the story. Everyone remembers the Hayes family. And everyone avoids that patch of ground where nothing grows and shadows fall at strange angles even in direct sunlight. In the archives of the Enfield Library, there's a box of materials related to the Hayes case. Newspaper clippings, photographs, even some of Thomas Hayes' diagrams. But there's one item that librarians handle carefully, some refusing to touch it at all. It's a child's drawing, done in crayon on yellowed paper. It shows a house with stick figures inside, clearly meant to be a family. But there are other figures too, dark shapes between the walls, under the floors, in the spaces that should be empty. At the bottom, in a child's uncertain handwriting, are the words, "The ones who watch us sleep." Eleanor Hayes drew that picture in August 1968, 2 days before the first knock on the door. How did she know what was coming? What did she see that others couldn't? These questions have no answers, only speculation and the uncomfortable feeling that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The phenomena at Enfield challenges our understanding of reality. It suggests that our homes, our safest spaces, can become something else entirely, that families can be driven from their lives by forces beyond comprehension, that children might perceive things adults cannot or will not acknowledge. The Hayes family found new lives far from Illinois, but those who knew them say they were never quite the same. Thomas developed an obsession with locks and security. Patricia never again hung pictures on walls. Diane spent years in therapy trying to process memories that didn't fit into any normal framework. Jeffrey refuses to enter basements to this day. And Eleanor? Eleanor keeps her promises, keeping secret whatever she learned in that house. But sometimes, her children say, they find her standing at windows, staring at empty spaces between walls, as if watching something only she can see. The Enfield poltergeist case forces us to confront the possibility that we share our world with something beyond our understanding, something that can manipulate physical reality, that can invade our homes, that can focus its attention on our children, something that remains unexplained despite decades of investigation. If you found this story intriguing, consider subscribing for more investigations into the unexplained. Share your own encounters in the comments below. What lurks in the spaces we think are empty? What watches from the corners of our homes? And perhaps most importantly, would you want to know the truth, even if that knowledge could never be unlearned?